Columbus, Ohio, you're next. Good morning.
Hey, Congressman Paul.
Hi.
I just wanted to make a comment and ask you a question here. First thing, an earlier caller was defending Julie Hyde Steele, and I would just remind people that there are two other people besides Kathleen Willey who claim that at that, years ago, she indeed told them the Kathleen Willey story, and if that's true, then she's a perjurer. And then the question I have for you is, as a libertarian, how do we strike the right balance between regulation and not having the government interfere? For example, say take the chemical industry. Someone who pollutes may save a lot of money,
Right.
Yet they could cause people to have cancer.
Right. No, that's a good question, because a libertarian has to be able to answer that, and we have to answer it in the context of the Constitution. In a free market, moral society, nobody has the right to injure their neighbor. So therefore, the chemical plants cannot dump pollution into the rivers, and they can't dump it into your air. It should be illegal. But during the Industrial Revolution, there was a collusion between big business and government that prevented that. Anybody who complained didn't get very far because it was necessary to promote the Industrial Revolution. But you don't need the federal government to do this unless under very, very rare circumstances. But states should handle this. It should be handled the same way as you and your neighbor handle your property. I mean, when you get a garbage can full of garbage, you're not allowed to go to the fence and just dump it over. You'd be arrested immediately. So if the chemical company or city sewage plants or anybody else pollutes, they should be stopped. But it should be stopped not by federal regulations, but by the protection and the honoring of property rights. And the courts should honor this. Too often, 100 years ago, the courts did not honor the property rights like they should.
Next call is from Cincinnati.
Mr. Paul.
Hello.
Hello. Got a question. You talk about the rights of privacy and the Banking Acts and everything, and people have a private capacity, and then they have a public capacity with their Social Security number through the Commerce Clause. How would you define the Constitution that would allow people to protect their private capacity?
Well, the Constitution, I think, is very clear that we as individuals should be protected. It honors the principle of private property, and is explicit that government can't intrude in our houses. So I think it's very clear, but I think we drifted from it. Even in 1935, under Social Security, when they brought this in, they were very reassuring to the American people. This Social Security card and Social Security number would never be used as an identifier. And yet that is what it's being used. Even up until 1961, we didn't even put our Social Security number on our tax returns. So I don't think it's too difficult. They just shouldn't have that authority to pry into our privacy. And they shouldn't be allowed to have a universal identifier. They shouldn't be able to have a national ID card. They shouldn't be allowed to set up this national medical data bank, which they're planning to do. And they certainly should never have said to the banks that you will monitor every single, not cash transaction, but every check transaction, every deposit. And if you vary from it, you will be reported to the FDIC and the DEA and the FBI and the Federal Reserve to find out maybe you committed a crime. In other words, you're guilty. Prove yourself innocent. So now there's a way you can separate this, and I think it's difficult, though, if you're a strong endorser of big government, because big government needs to monitor what the people are doing. And a lot of conservatives too often will say, well, this program isn't so good, and I'm not for it, but we better make sure there's no waste and fraud, so they try to clean up the waste and fraud, and therefore that invites them to say, well, we better know exactly what everybody is doing, and this will prevent it. Well, the basic problem there is the government is doing way too much or involved in programs they shouldn't be involved in.
We have about 15 more minutes in our conversation with Mr. Paul. You were reading the morning newspapers this morning. I think we got to a number of your topics. Why don't you look and see if there's some others? I'm going to listen to a call on the internet.
Okay, go ahead.
Westerville, Ohio, Liberal Line.
Yes,
Good morning.
Mr. Paul. I have been a dyed-in-the-wool Republican for about 30 years, and in the last 4 years I have become so disgusted with the Republican Party not owning up to what I would call principles. Here you have Dennis Hastert, who is the leader of the party now as Speaker of the House, slipping in a $250,000 taxpayer grant for the study of caffeinated gum, which, as I see it, definitely supports the Stay Alert caffeinated gum company in his home district. Now, if he is the leader of the party setting that kind of example, what kind of hope is there for the Republican Party to do anything in regards to trimming down government and lowering taxes?
Let me ask you a question, sir. How did you find out the information about that?
Through the Cato Institute.
So are you online with them, or do they send you documents?
I'm a sponsor of the Cato, and I got that through some of their documents.
Is it an article they wrote, or do you actually sit and spend some time looking at budgets, federal budgets, to look for programs like this?
I believe it was an article written by Edward Crane, the president of the Cato Institute. Okay. And also, when you look at their handbook for Congress, you find a lot of information in there.
All right, thanks.
Good. That's good information, and I think you raise an important point on whether or not we do have hope. I guess I wouldn't be here if we didn't have some hope, because if we can't run for office and we can't come to Congress and do things, then there is no hope, and I should do something else for a living and go back to medicine. But I understand why people would be discouraged, but I can compare being in Congress in the 1970s to the 1990s. And I really believe that after 1994 there would be more hope and more enthusiasm, and there is. I can do more now with the Republicans in charge than I could before. But if you try to say, and if you try to get me to argue that things are rosy and we're really moving rapidly toward a free society, then I have to be hesitant.
Did you find this?
Yes. This was a very brief mention in the New York Times, a very small article, and also a very small mention in the Wall Street Journal, but I consider it very important. It has to do with Qatar. Qatar was meeting, I think, with Bill, one of the ambassadors meeting with Bill Cohen, and they really came out strongly. They're one of our allies in the Persian Gulf War, and they're over in that area, but they've strongly come out and they have criticized us bombing, this continuous bombing of Iraq. So I think it's something that the American people have to be alert to, and the Congress, is that this ongoing war, we've been bombing and essentially occupying Iraq for a longer period of time than we did Japan after World War II. So this to me is something that even our close allies in the regions who have the most at stake are getting tired of us endlessly bombing Iraq, killing a lot of innocent people, embargoing, taking away food and medicine from children, at the same time believing that this is actually getting rid of Saddam Hussein. It actually strengthens Saddam Hussein. I would like to bring this to our attention, mainly to suggest that maybe we ought to rethink our foreign policy in that area.
Next call is from Huntsville, Tennessee, conservative line.
Hello.
Hello.
Glad to get to speak on C-SPAN.
Well, we're glad to have you. What's on your mind?
Well, we've all hollered about government being too big, government doing too much, government not doing enough. We've got a republic for which it stands, and the people really don't have any input in it too much, except we get chosen or elected officials from the start. And you mentioned it a while ago that people outside don't have much of a chance to get in, especially if they just got a good idea and ain't got no money and don't go nowhere. And what I'm trying to say is, why don't we bust up Washington, D.C.? They're all the time trying to get 2 senators and congressmen elected out of the D.C. area. Why don't we send the agriculture department maybe to Tennessee, which I'm from Tennessee, but we send the other department heads to all the 50 states, and that way, with all the communications that we have in this country today, and it's going to get bigger every year, all it takes is a phone call from the satellite back to Washington, D.C., or to Tennessee, or to Wyoming, or wherever, to Texas, wherever you're from, and we could bust up all that stuff, and it would cost less to do it, because all the people that likes to go to Washington and buy their way into the government to do their thing for themselves, then that would limit all that, and it would cost less to operate the government, and we could get a tax break, you know.
Huntsville, thanks. Let me let you go at that point.
I think it's a good idea, but I would just return this function to the state because the state had the proper responsibility to take care of all these. I wouldn't maintain the big federal bureaucracies and just split them up. I would send all the responsibility back to the states.